Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, we return to the ridgelines and hollows of Appalachia, where the air runs thin and the stories run deep. I'll be sharing 8 new true encounters, each stranger than the last. A whistle that mimics your breath, a tree that remembers where you stepped, a boy with no face, holding a lantern that never dies. These aren't just legends, they're warnings, told by those who made it back. If the dark ever felt like it was looking back at you, this episode is for you. Like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from, especially if you've seen something just past the firelight. Now, hush the world and listen close. Don't stop if you hear a second whistle, the ranger told me. Only the first one's us. I remember nodding absently, thinking it was just another vague trail warning meant for beginners. My name is Leah Monroe, 29 years old, a volunteer nurse with the Appalachian Mountain Rescue Team. Last October, I took a 3-day solo sweep assignment across a section of the Roan Highlands. It was a routine end-of-season job: check the shelters, note any abandoned gear, flag hazardous areas before the snow came in. But for me, it was more than work. It was a way to escape the constant beeping of hospital monitors, the echoes of a failed code blue, and the face of someone I couldn't save. The first night was uneventful. Gentle wind, a clear sky, and the kind of stillness that makes the stars seem closer than they should be. I pitched my tent in an open spot along a ridge where I could see the trail below. Around 11:45 p.m., I heard a whistle, long and distinct, the kind used by rangers. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped outside, and scanned the trail. Nothing. I radioed in. No response. 15 minutes later, another whistle sounded, but this one was shorter, off-tempo, and somehow felt closer. Then came the third. It matched the exact rhythm I had tapped on my camp stove earlier that evening. 2 short, 1 long. No one else knew that pattern but me. I barely slept. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Twice I thought I heard someone circling the tent, but the ground outside was undisturbed. At dawn, I packed up and headed east, only to find myself looping the same terrain. I passed a trio of birch trees 3 times. I placed a rock as a marker, walked 15 steps forward, and returned to it again. My compass needle spun slowly, then faster, then stopped altogether. Near the tent, I found a torn piece of paper. The handwriting was mine, but I'd never written it. If you hear your own name in the woods, don't answer. It remembers voices. I checked my phone. No signal. The day before, I'd had 3 bars. The second night, I kept the fire low and the flashlight close. Around 2:17 a.m., the whistle returned. Then a voice followed my voice, softly calling, "Leah, come check vitals." I froze. That was something I used to say during late-night hospital rounds. The voice moved slowly around the tent, whispering things I hadn't said in years, old phrases, childhood thoughts, fears I'd buried and forgotten. When the sun rose, I stepped outside and found a single smooth stone placed directly in front of the tent entrance. I didn't put it there. Day 3, I abandoned the trail, hoping to cut south through instinct alone. But every path I took brought me back to that same area. The forest kept tugging me towards something unseen. On 5 different trees, I found the same symbol carved fresh into the bark, a circle split vertically by a single line. I no longer knew how far I'd gone. As darkness fell, I didn't set up camp. I crouched between 2 rocks, gripping an unlit flare. Around 4 a.m., I saw a figure at the ridge above, tall, silent, holding something to its lips. Then came the whistle tap, tap, thumb, my exact rhythm. I yanked the flare. It didn't light. But something else did, a faint glint, like moonlight bouncing off glass, though there was no moon that night. Then my voice came again. This time, from behind, "You shouldn't have answered." I spun around. No one. Just the tent, my gear. Flashlight all zipped, packed, untouched, as if I'd never used them at all. I didn't go near the tent. I stood outside the fire ring for a long time, staring at my gear, every zipper closed, every item perfectly packed. I hadn't touched any of it since morning. But here it was reassembled, like someone had hit rewind on my life and pressed play without telling me. The tent flap even swayed slightly, like it had just been zipped shut a moment ago. I backed away slowly and left it all behind. I knew I should report it, hike back to the last known post or wait for rescue. But something deeper inside, some instinct I don't know how to name, told me not to stop moving. The sun never rose fully that morning, just a dull gray bloom that barely lit the trail. I followed a creek, hoping to find a lower path or a trail junction. But the stream looped back on itself twice. At the third crossing, I realized I was moving in a circle. I left a piece of gear at a fork in the path, my water filter, and found it again an hour later, resting on a stump like someone had set it out for me. That's when I heard the whistle again, faint, melodic, like it wasn't trying to alert me anymore. It was trying to lure me, around what I guessed was noon. I found a patch of flattened grass beside a rock wall shaped like a jaw. I rested there and turned on my sat phone, hoping to catch even one bar of signal. The screen flickered, then blinked off. It turned back on by itself and began to play an audio file I didn't record. It was my voice again. Don't stop if you hear the second whistle. Only this time, it was slower, dragged out, like something was learning my cadence, my phrasing. I threw the phone. It didn't break, just went dark, like it had finished what it needed to say. Later that evening, I found my name carved into a tree, not just once, but many times. Some were deep and old, bark grown around them. Others were fresh, too fresh. The wind had stopped again. The forest was holding its breath. That night, I didn't set a fire. I didn't sleep. I just sat with my back against a rock, gripping the flare like a lifeline. And when I finally blinked too long, I dreamt I was inside the tent again, but it was zipped from the outside. And I could hear footsteps circling slowly. Soft, careful, waiting. When I woke, I was inside the tent, fully zipped, bag packed, my boots cleaned and neatly lined up. There were no signs of a struggle, no damage, just the quiet sense that something had changed hands while I slept. I left the tent in a daze and saw the figure again, just a glimpse at the edge of the woods. Same height as me, same build, same jacket. It moved just like I do. Head slightly tilted when scanning. I didn't follow it. I turned in the opposite direction and ran until my legs burned. Eventually, I crested a ridge I didn't recognize and saw something impossible, a fire tower standing tall. Lantern light glowing at the top. I don't know how I got up there. I only remember the view trees stretching in every direction like waves frozen mid-break. I turned on the emergency beacon strapped to my vest. A few seconds later, The sat phone chirped back to life and buzzed with a connection. Relief flooded me. Then a voice came through. Not a ranger. Not even a voice I fully knew. Just a whisper, calm and flat. "You're not Leah. You're just the last thing it wore." I passed out on the floor of that tower. A rescue team found me the next day, curled up beside the signal box, lips cracked, boots untied. They said I was miles from where I should have been, and my last check-in was 3 days overdue. I don't remember those missing hours. I don't remember walking into the tower. But sometimes I find myself waking in places I didn't fall asleep, with my gear packed neatly beside me. The whistle doesn't come every night now, just sometimes, especially when the wind's high, and the forest gets quiet in that particular way. 2 short, 1 long. I've learned not to answer, but I still hear it out in the dark, or behind me, or worse, in my own voice. My name's Miguel Astor. I'm 32, a contracted botanical researcher from the university. I was sent out to the cranberry glades for a week-long survey of floral health and moss migration across a warming climate line. The bog's an unusual ecosystem, high altitude, acidic, scattered with pitcher plants and ghost white orchids. I'd been there once before, years back as a grad student, and remembered it feeling peaceful, quiet. But this time, that quiet felt heavy, like the whole wetland was holding its breath. That tree was only a few hundred feet from my camp. The first time I passed it, I remember thinking the bark looked oddly fresh, as if the tree had been turned, or peeled back and glued together again. Its trunk was too symmetrical, and the curve of its roots bent in a way I'd never seen before, like they were reaching away from something underground. I chalked it up to bog instability or wind stress, wrote it off. But every morning after that, I found myself walking back to it. The compass in my pack kept dragging me toward that same patch of ground. On day 4, my phone died despite being at 60% when I zipped the tent. Not dead wiped. No signal history, no apps, just a blank home screen. My backup GPS unit showed I was still in the glades, but the coordinates were subtly wrong, just enough to make the maps useless. I hiked out a 1/4 mile, set a bright blue flag by a stump, and turned back. 10 minutes later, I was standing at the tree again. The flag was gone. There were no tracks in the peat. No drag marks, no wind. That night, the temperature dropped suddenly. A hard frost glazed my tent, even though it hadn't dipped that low in the forecast. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of something brushing against the nylon, slow and steady, like someone running fingers across the surface. I unzipped the flap and found nothing but fog. Except the tree was closer, maybe 10 feet closer than it had been before. I convinced myself I'd misjudged, that maybe I'd set up camp nearer than I thought. But that didn't explain why the moss now ringed the entire trunk, a perfect collar all the way around. The next morning, I opened my field journal and found 5 pages I didn't remember writing. My handwriting, but too clean, too even. Every line started with a timestamp, though none of them matched the hours I'd been awake. One entry said, "It waits while you sleep." Another read, "The roots remember where you've stepped." The final line chilled me more than I'd admit aloud. "You turned your back first." I tried to laugh it off, but the sound didn't feel real. I tore out the pages and burned them in my camp stove. The smoke smelled like cedar, not birch. By evening, My trail markers' bright pink tape tied to low branches had vanished. I know I placed them. I double-knotted every strip. Instead, I found scraps of white cloth fluttering from the same trees. Old linen, frayed, like someone had been unwrapping themselves one layer at a time. The wind shifted strange after that, no longer moving across the bog, but toward the tree, always toward it. Like the forest itself had a gravity. I huddled in the tent that night, trying to keep warm, trying not to look at the shadows on the nylon. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, not animal. Two-legged, slow, deliberate. I held my breath as they stopped just beside my tent. Then something leaned against it from outside. Not hard, just enough pressure to make the nylon bend in. I didn't breathe, didn't move. And then it whispered. Low and cracked, you found it. I didn't sleep after that, just sat frozen, gripping the unlit flare stick like it would mean something if whatever was outside decided to come in. But it never entered. When the sky started to pale, I crawled out and found no footprints, no flattened grass, no signs of life at all. Only the tree again, now less than 5 feet from my tent, its bark wet with morning dew or sweat. The moss was gone, stripped clean, but where it had been, something darker stained the trunk, like a ring burned into the wood. I packed fast, not bothering to double-check anything. I told myself I was leaving, pushing west, going downhill until I hit a road or logging cut. But no matter how I turned, the glades folded over me. I walked for hours, and yet the tree remained nearby, sometimes just glimpsed through the fog. Sometimes so close, it brushed my shoulder as I passed. I stopped trying to map it. I stopped marking my steps. All I did was move. When my legs gave out, I drank the last of my water and chewed a raw root I barely recognized. It tasted bitter, and I threw it up minutes later. By that afternoon, the air felt too thin, like the elevation had changed. Birds still weren't singing. In fact, I hadn't heard a single natural sound in nearly a day. I passed a stump split perfectly down the middle and realized I'd seen it before. At least 3 times. I started to wonder if the tree was following me, or if I was following it. The line blurred. Somewhere along the way, I lost the notebook entirely. In its place, I found a different one, same brand, same binding, but filled with different entries. Entries I didn't write. One page said, Day 6, he sleeps in loops. Another had only a crude drawing of the tree, but the roots beneath it stretched out like a nervous system, touching a human figure curled underground. That night, I didn't pitch the tent. I just lay beneath the open sky, waiting to either wake up or vanish. The moon never came out. Fog rolled over me like a second skin, heavy and wet. Then came the voice again, not a whisper this time, but a child's tone, speaking directly into my left ear. You turned it the wrong way. I screamed. I don't remember standing, but I remember running. Branches whipped my face. My shirt tore on something slick and barkless. The ground dipped, then rose, then vanished entirely as I tumbled into blackness. I woke in a hollow, face down in mud, the smell of decay thick in my nose. The tree stood at the rim, still too straight, too symmetrical. Its bark no longer birch, but something darker, oily, and unfamiliar. The roots moved, not fast, just enough to pulse. I closed my eyes and told myself it wasn't real. But when I opened them, the roots had grown longer, closer. I rolled away, dragging myself through the muck until I hit cold stone. There, I found an old boundary marker, rusted iron driven into bedrock. It gave me just enough orientation to head west, toward higher ground. Eventually, a rescue crew found me. 3 days after I was supposed to return. They said I was dehydrated, raving, and kept pointing behind them, insisting the tree was moving. I don't remember that part. But when they showed me the footage from my body cam, blurry and grainy, it was all still, all quiet, until the last 30 seconds, when the video warped, and a single frame showed the birch tree standing behind my shoulder. I've tried to go back since. Maps don't match what I saw. The coordinates I marked lead to dry pine, not bog, and that tree, I've seen its shape in my dreams. Sometimes just the outline. Sometimes I'm inside it, looking out. I still keep the new journal. I don't write in it anymore. But every week, another page turns. They say the bell only rings at midnight, and only if something was buried without its name. I used to think that was metaphor grief poetry or local superstition, but now I'm not so sure. My name is Dana Fields. I'm 41, a former pastor turned hospice counselor. And I went up to Clingman's Dome last fall to put something to rest. Not a person, not exactly. Something that had followed me out of a deathbed whisper, all the way from a hospital in Kingsport to the highest peak in the Smokies. It started with a patient, Mavis Dunn, 92 years old, lungs failing but mind sharp as splinters. 3 nights before she passed. She grabbed my hand with surprising strength and asked if the bell still rang where her brother died. I thought she was rambling. I asked what bell. She wouldn't answer, just kept saying, "Don't let it take his name." The next morning, she was nonverbal, gone by sundown. The night after her funeral, I heard a faint bell on the wind outside my apartment. I told myself it was just nerves. But the sound came again the next night, and the next, always just before midnight. I tried to pray. The words came out wrong. I found myself repeating fragments I didn't remember writing. Odd combinations like bind the air and bend the ground. I didn't tell anyone. I just started researching the Dunn family. Found records of a brother, Daniel, who disappeared during a 1947 hiking trip near Clingman's Dome. No body, no burial. Just a single newspaper line. Search suspended after bell, heard ringing for 3 nights. That was enough for me. I packed light, brought a field recorder, and told my boss I needed a week away. Closure, I said. Just needed closure. I arrived on the trail in early October. The trees were thinning, burnt orange and bone gray, and the air smelled like old paper. I hiked solo, no radio, no GPS beyond my compass and handwritten notes. I found the remains of an old foundation off-trail on day 2, a square of stone overgrown with ivy. A rusted bell bracket twisted into the ground. No bell, no marker. Just a crude cross carved upside down into the flat face of a nearby rock. That night, I camped close, too tired to climb back. The wind died around 11:30. At 12:01, the bell rang. Not loud, not even metallic, just a hollow thump that vibrated in the ribs. I stood outside the tent, scanning the dark, and heard it again, one long note. Then silence. I turned on the recorder. It picked up nothing, just ambient static. I whispered a short prayer out of habit, then froze, the moment I said amen. My voice echoed back from the trees, but in reverse. Clear, distinct. The same cadence, but backward syllables. I didn't sleep. I just sat up, waiting for dawn, watching for something that never came. In the morning, I checked the recorder again. This time, there was audio. Not the bell, not the prayer, just breathing, ragged, wet. It looped after 34 seconds. When I scrubbed through the file, the loop changed length each time, like something didn't want to be pinned down. I left the campsite, but the air didn't feel different. If anything, the forest felt smaller. The wind only moved one direction toward the old foundation. I climbed higher, hoping for open air, clearer signal, distance instead. I found a second foundation. Same layout, same rock, same inverted cross, same bracket. Only this one had fresh soil piled in a neat square where a bell should hang. I don't know why I dug. I didn't want to. But my hands were already in the dirt before I realized what I was doing. The soil was soft, fresh despite the lack of rain. About a foot down, my fingers struck metal thin, round, corroded. I pulled it free and found an old handbell, the kind they used in one-room churches or schoolhouses. The handle was wrapped in something brittle, like dried leather. It smelled faintly of soot. When I held it up, it didn't ring, but I could feel it hum in my palm, like it was holding something back. That night, I camped even further uphill, away from the foundations, near a dead tree split by lightning. I left the bell outside the tent. It didn't feel right bringing it in. Around midnight, the wind stopped again. The woods fell completely silent. Then, for the first time, I heard footsteps not close, not far, just pacing the perimeter of my camp. Steady, slow, heavy. I didn't dare unzip the tent. My recorder picked up a voice saying my name in a flat, distant tone, not shouted, just spoken, calm, and not my name exactly, Fields Dana, like it didn't understand the order of things. At sunrise, the bell was gone. In its place was a rosary, half buried in ash. I don't carry a rosary, never have, but the beads were warm to the touch, as if someone had just been holding them. I tried to retrace my steps down the trail, but the markers I'd made small crosses scratched into bark had been reversed, flipped, mirrored, like a photo held wrong. I passed 3 more foundations that day, each one identical, each one colder than the last. By then, I stopped checking the compass. It spun constantly, like it was trying to escape the needle. The 4th night, I broke. I rang the bell. Not the real one, I had nothing left, but I cupped my hands and made the shape. The motion, the rhythm. 3 slow tolls. I don't know why. Maybe to prove I still could. The wind answered, but not from the trees, from beneath me. The ground exhaled. The bell sound returned louder, clearer, impossibly close. My ears rang with it. I dropped to my knees and prayed aloud, desperate for clarity, for protection. But again, my voice echoed back wrong. Not reversed, this time doubled, spoken over itself, like 2 versions of me were praying from different timelines. That night, I dreamed of a chapel with no roof, just walls made of stacked stone and old fog. Inside stood a man with no face, holding a bell by the clapper. He didn't ring it. He just stared, motionless. When I looked down, the floor was made of names carved into wood, dozens, hundreds, all scratched through but one, Daniel Dunn. Then I heard Mavis's voice whisper, "Name it, or it wears yours." I woke screaming. I made it back to the trailhead the next morning. I don't remember how I got there. No food, no map. just my bag and the rosary still tucked inside. A park ranger found me collapsed beside the overlook. I told him about the bell. He went pale. Told me nobody's been able to find those old foundations for decades. They appear, he said, but only when something's waiting to be claimed. I didn't answer, just handed him the rosary. He held it like it weighed more than it should have. I don't counsel patients anymore. I don't speak names aloud unless I have to. And I never, ever listen to church bells after dark. Because sometimes, even now, if I listen too long, I still hear my own prayer echoing back, slightly off, like someone's still getting the words right. It was late January, just after the big storm, when I found the first reversed tracks. My name's Eli Cartwright. I'd just turned 18 working the winter season as a tracker for my uncle's outfitting business out near Spruce Knob. Nothing fancy, mostly guiding city folks through snowshoe trails and helping game wardens locate winter-killed deer before the scavengers got there first. The mountains had a way of swallowing sound in winter. Everything gets so quiet, you start to hear your own heartbeat between the trees. I always liked that silence, until I heard it broken by something that didn't make sense. The prints showed up near a dry stream bed, deep in the backcountry. At first glance, I thought they belonged to a buck 4 sharp hooves, big body weight, maybe wounded from the way the back prints dragged. But when I circled around, the tracks were pointing the wrong way. Not just 1 or 2 prints, all of them. The deer hadn't walked into the woods. It had walked out, backward, or else it had been following something using its own path as cover. Either way, something about it felt wrong, like seeing a photograph flipped in a mirror. I radioed my uncle, but the line cracked and fizzled. We weren't supposed to split up out there, but I felt pulled, like the tracks weren't leading me deeper. But back to something I'd forgotten. The trail twisted into a hollow I didn't recognize. Snow was still fresh, untouched beyond the prints. No wind, just heavy silence and a cold that clung to my lungs. I followed the tracks until they stopped at the edge of a narrow glade, ringed with spruce. In the center stood a stag. Massive. Still, its rack of antlers stretched wide, covered in a sheen of ice that glittered like glass. It didn't move, not even when I stepped forward. Its eyes met mine, and that's what froze me. They were too human, not like a person, but like they held recognition, as if it knew something about me that I didn't. I raised my scope, just to get a better look. I swear I didn't mean to spook it. But when I blinked, it was gone. No scatter, no sound, no prints, just gone. I stepped into the glade and saw something waiting in its place, a pair of my own boot prints, set neatly in the snow ahead of me, facing the direction I had just come from. I turned around, heart pounding, and saw nothing but unbroken white behind me. The prints didn't match mine from earlier. These were newer, cleaner, and they led straight back to my camp. By the time I made it back, night had fallen faster than it should have. My fire pit was still warm, even though I'd been gone for hours. My tent flap hung open, and my lighter, which I always keep zipped inside my inner coat pocket, was lying in the snow, dry, unused. I checked my bag, and something else was off. The jerky pouch had been opened and resealed. My journal had a page folded back I didn't remember writing. It read, "The antlers don't shed. They remember." I didn't sleep much, just lay in the tent, knife close, waiting for something to move. The wind never came. No animals, no sound at all. except for a low, steady crunching sometime after midnight, like hooves pacing just beyond the tree line. When I finally worked up the courage to look, I saw nothing. But in the morning, the prints were there again. This time, they circled the tent. Backward, perfect loops. As if whatever it was had walked around me while I slept, reclaiming something it left behind. I broke camp as soon as the light was strong enough to see by. Every instinct in my gut told me to get out while I could. But the woods wouldn't let me move in a straight line. Every time I thought I was heading downhill, I ended up climbing. The sun shifted without moving. My compass needle twitched like it was being tugged. I told myself it was magnetite under the ground, just a local anomaly. But even saying it aloud didn't make it feel true. The wind had died again. Just the sound of my boots crunching snow, and once, the dry crack of antlers brushing through tree limbs behind me. By early afternoon, I found myself back in that same glade. The prints had returned. This time, not just deer, but human ones too. A man's boot, smaller than mine, pacing around the perimeter of the open snowfield in tight, uneven spirals. I followed them out of sheer instinct. They led to a patch of trampled earth under a spruce tree. Where a small bundle had been laid, strips of deer hide wrapped around something stiff. I unwrapped it and found a single antler, curved and jagged, stained dark at the tip. It wasn't frozen. It was warm, like it had just been dropped. I left it there, backed away slow and didn't look over my shoulder. But that night, in my tent, I found the antler again tucked neatly inside my sleeping bag. My body locked up with a cold I can't describe. Not fear, recognition. I pulled it out with shaking hands, but when I reached the flap to throw it, the wind spoke. Just once, low and sharp, like a voice passed through pine. Take it back. I stepped outside and saw the stag again. Same size, same rack, but this time, it stood closer, waiting. I don't remember chasing it, but I know I ran. The trees turned into tunnels, the snow deepened, and time unraveled. I passed a dead doe, gutted clean but untouched by scavengers. Her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. Around her were more boot prints mine, but reversed, like I'd already been here. The stag moved between the trees like a shadow, just out of reach at some point. I tripped, fell hard on ice, and landed in another clearing I didn't recognize. A circle of trees stood at the edge, everyone stripped of bark as high as a man could reach. In the center was a stone altar, old, weather-worn, carved with antlers. I didn't approach. I didn't have to. I knew what it was for. I turned to leave and found another version of my backpack resting on a rock, perfectly clean. Inside was my journal new, uncreased. The page was already open, the pen lying beside it. The entry read, "He gave it back. It's yours now." My hand trembled. I looked behind me. Nothing but trees, no wind, no tracks. The antler was gone. Eventually, I stumbled my way back to camp, or something like it. My gear had been disturbed again, food missing, radio battery drained, snow melted where something heavy had lain. My uncle found me a day later after I missed check-in. He said I looked thinner, older, like I hadn't eaten in days. But I'd only been gone for one night. My journal entries from that week are all identical, just a single drawing of the antlers, growing wider and wider each time. Sometimes now, in winter, I wake up to find my boots by the door, dusted with snow, and once, just once, I found tracks leading away from my cabin. Deer and mine, walking side by side into the woods. I've walked trails all over Appalachia, marked, unmarked, mapped and abandoned, but I've never seen one appear where none should exist. My name's Simone Clay, 36, a landscape photographer working mostly in black and white. I was in Pisgah National Forest last spring scouting locations for a print series, old cabins, forgotten bridges, moss-choked riverbeds. I parked near a known trailhead and hiked out early, intending to shoot sunrise through the tree line. Instead, I found a path I didn't recognize, narrow, overgrown, and absent from every ranger map I carried. And the strange part was, I'd photographed that exact bend months before. Same stones, same light angle, but I couldn't recall ever walking it. The trail pulled at me. That's the only way I can describe it. I told myself I'd follow it just a short way, 20 minutes tops. But it stretched on. Too level to be natural and too consistent to be wild. I started hearing bird song in reverse. Little flutters of sound that unraveled like tape playing backward. I paused to replay some field audio and nearly dropped the recorder. My own voice echoed faintly on the tape, whispering things I hadn't said. Not then. Not yet. My breath caught as I listened to myself mutter. This is where the light goes wrong. The forest thickened unnaturally. Pines on one side, oaks on the other, as though two ecosystems had been stitched together and left to heal badly. I passed a cairn I didn't remember stacking, though I'd shot something like it before. My phone's gallery showed 3 photos I hadn't taken each one of the trail ahead, framed from slightly different angles. In the third, my camera bag was already lying on the ground 10 feet in front of me. But it was still on my back. I stopped walking, turned slowly. Nothing. But the sound of leaves crunching behind me didn't match my steps. At the fork, both paths looked the same trees, same moss, same curve of fallen log. I took the left, then circled back and took the right. Each led to the same clearing, the same tree with a half-buried signpost reading, "Welcome back." I laughed, soft and strained, but it died quickly. The laughter echoed delayed by a second, like it had to find its way through something thick. I checked the time. I'd been walking for nearly 4 hours, but the sun hadn't moved. I decided to eat and rest, hoping orientation would come back with food. I pulled out my journal and froze. Someone had drawn a crude map of the trail on the inside cover, complete with a looping section labeled Mirror Bend. Beneath it, a note in my handwriting read, "Choose the left. You already failed right." I hadn't written that. The ink was dry, but the line wasn't familiar. Still, I packed up and went left again. The trail narrowed, the trees pressed in, and the light began to warp bright patches where there should be shadow. Long dusk in places the sun hadn't touched. That night, I camped in the only clearing that didn't echo back my movements. Every cough, every whisper, every sigh returned just slightly wrong. I took one photo of the treetops at dusk, and in the print preview, I saw a second tent pitched behind mine. I turned fast, nothing there, but the tent flap moved like it had just been touched. I zipped mine shut and didn't sleep. I kept the camera off after that. Something about seeing what wasn't there, what might be there, felt more dangerous than just not knowing. I packed before first light, though I swear the night never ended. The sky stayed that odd, colorless gray, like dawn frozen mid-breath. As I moved, the forest began doubling itself, every few hundred feet. I passed a feature I recognized, but reversed. A fallen pine I'd seen to my left now lay on my right. The moss on the trees had switched sides. I thought I was making progress, but the landmarks were chasing me. By late morning, I reached a ridgeline that should have offered a view of the valley. Instead, it overlooked a clearing I knew I'd already passed. And standing there was a figure. Small, still, wearing my coat. I don't know how I knew it, but I did. It was me. Back turned, facing the trail I was now on, camera in hand. I raised my lens without thinking, zoomed in, and saw my own fingers press the shutter on the other side. A flicker of light hit my eyes as the distant camera flashed. I dropped the lens and turned, heart slamming. Nothing but trees behind me. I ran, not far, just until my legs gave out. I collapsed in a patch of loam and pine needles. And when I looked up, the world had changed again. Now the forest looked as if it had been drawn outlines slightly off. Trees vibrating at the edge of my vision. My hands felt too far away from my body. I whispered my name just to anchor myself. But the voice that came back wasn't mine. It was younger, quieter, and said, "Don't forget what you left here." The trail in front of me now had two sets of prints, one mine, one lighter, barefoot, weaving beside me like a shadow that had learned to walk. I made it to the junction by early evening. A rusted sign had appeared, "Clay Loop abandoned. Do not enter." I don't know why, but seeing my own name broke something. I opened my journal and saw dozens of entries. Now none I remembered writing. They all started the same way you came here to remember. But it remembered you first. My breath caught. On the last page, a photo had been taped to still from my own camera, but older, dated 3 years back. It showed the clearing I was standing in, and me, walking away from it. I tried to leave the trail, cut cross-country through rhododendron and old stone, but the deeper I went, the more the forest resisted. Trees began to mirror themselves perfectly. Bark split in symmetrical scars, branches pointing in instead of out. At one point, I passed my own discarded water bottle, frozen mid-fall on the ground, like time had paused just long enough to make it forget how to land. The air grew thick and wet, like fog made of breath. I heard my name again. Closer now. Not threatening, not angry, just insistent. Eventually, I found myself back at the original fork, the place where both trails looked the same. Only now, there was no left or right, just a loop. Both sides curving inward, and standing in the middle was me. Same coat, same pack, same tired eyes. She looked at me and said, calmly, "Don't choose again, just walk." Then she stepped into the trees and vanished. I followed, because I didn't know what else to do. They found me 2 days later, curled near the trailhead, camera in hand, every photo wiped clean. The ranger said I looked like I'd been walking in circles, muttering my own name under my breath. I don't photograph trails anymore. I don't even walk them. Because sometimes, even now, my camera takes a photo by itself, and the person in the frame isn't quite me. They say the old mine still breathes. You can hear it at dusk. If you stand quiet near the mouth, just a low inhale. Like the mountain hasn't forgotten what it buried. My name is Grayson Pike. I'm 52, a coal historian from Lexington. And last fall, I returned to Harlan County to document the remnants of a collapsed shaft that killed my grandfather in 1949. It wasn't just research. My mother had just passed, and going back felt like opening the last locked box of her memory. She'd never spoken much about him, only said the hollow still sang at night, and that if I ever went near it, I should never follow the music in. The mine site was mostly gone, reclaimed by moss and creeping laurel. I found the rusted cart rails half swallowed by dirt, and a few beams sticking out from under the earth like broken ribs. No official markers, just a rotted danger sign nailed crooked to a sycamore. I set up my tent on a flat spot nearby, near the creek where I was told the bodies were first recovered. That first night was too quiet for a place that once held so many men and machines. Around midnight, I heard the first note, just one high, clear, soft like a child humming from a long hallway. I sat up, heart tight. It didn't sound mechanical, not wind, not a bird. It was a melody, slow and simple, repeated every few minutes. I turned on my recorder, held it out into the night, and listened. The mic picked up nothing, just my own breath and the faint babble of the creek. But the melody continued, unbothered. It wasn't coming from above, it was rising from below. I walked to the mine mouth, a crumbled hole half filled with rock and leaf. The sound grew louder, still soft, still distant, but deliberate, like someone humming a lullaby meant only for me. I went back to the tent, shaken but trying to rationalize it. Echoes, old air currents, anything but what it felt like. Before I zipped the flap, I checked the recorder again. A new file had appeared. One I hadn't made, no label, just a timestamp a few minutes before. I played it. There was the melody clear and steady, and underneath it, my mother's voice saying my name like she used to when waking me for school. I dropped the recorder. When I picked it back up, the file was gone. The second day, I wandered the slope above the mine, found bits of shale, rusted tools, even a crushed miner's lamp half buried under years of rot. I took pictures. I read names from old rosters and spoke them aloud, one by one, into the hollow. It felt like the right thing to do. But when I stopped to rest and flipped through my journal, I found each of those names already written on the next page, one after another, in handwriting that wasn't mine. At the bottom, we heard him sing before it fell. That night, the melody returned. Louder, closer. This time, it had words, a voice like my own, singing something soft and low in a dialect older than I knew. I pressed my ear to the ground. The dirt was warm, breathing. I whispered a prayer, and the ground beneath me answered not with words, but with rhythm. My own heartbeat mirrored back, out of sync by half a second, like something beneath the mountain had learned its own pattern and was trying to match it, or replace it. The morning came dim and slow, as if the light had to claw its way through the trees. My tent was zipped, my bag untouched, but the recorder was running full battery, red light blinking. I didn't turn it on. The file was already saved, dated hours before I woke. I played it back with hands too tired to tremble. First silence, then my own voice, reciting a name I hadn't read aloud, Matthew Breen, one of the last to vanish in the collapse. After my voice, another answered in a thick, wet breath. He's here now. I tried to leave that day, packed fast, ditched gear I didn't need. The path back to my car should have been a single trail through dense pine. But the trail split once, then again, and again until I was walking in a spiral. Every tree marked with a faint symbol, a pickaxe crossed by a bell. I hadn't painted them, and they weren't there before. My phone compass spun like a coin. The creek I'd used to orient myself had gone silent. I turned back toward camp, hoping to regroup, but the mine mouth was gone. The sycamore still stood. The beams, the rails, everything else. Missing. I collapsed on the hillside, too tired to fight the illusion. As I sat there, breath ragged, I noticed something under my boot, a strip of old linen cloth, buried in the dirt. I tugged it free. It was part of a shirt cuff, singed and marked with my grandfather's initials. GP. That's when I finally broke. I screamed his name into the trees, into the hollow, into whatever was watching. The echo came back twice, once delayed, once immediate, like two mouths trying to say the same thing through different throats. Night fell like a hand closing around my face. The melody returned, no longer a lullaby, but a dirge, sung through soil. I lay still inside the tent, the air too heavy to breathe, and listened as footsteps circled. No crunch, just pressure, weight. Something pressed a palm against the nylon wall. I could feel each finger. Cold, wet, steady. It didn't try to enter, just leaned in and whispered, "Name it, or it names you." By morning, the mine was back. Whole. Standing tall with a fresh timber frame and a new bell hung above the entrance. It rang once, clear as iron, and the door opened. Inside, lanterns burned with no flame. Wooden beams shone like they'd just been hewn. I stepped inside. My breath caught in the warmth. The walls were lined with names etched, burned, painted, and mine was at the bottom, still wet with ink. I don't remember leaving. They say I walked into a ranger station 2 counties east, covered in dust, speaking in an accent too old for my tongue. I don't remember the walk, or the days that passed. Only the sound of the bell in my ears, soft and constant. I've never gone back. Never will. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the ground hum beneath my apartment. And just before sleep takes me, I feel my heartbeat fall out of sync just for a moment, as if something below is still trying to match it. Everyone in Fayette County's heard of the Lantern Boy. A child said to wander the gorge trails after dark, holding a flickering light that never dies. The stories go back generations, miners, rangers, hikers. They all say the same thing if you see the lantern. Don't follow, not because you won't find him, but because he'll find you first. My name is Trinity Bell. 22, and last summer I took an internship with the National Park Service at New River Gorge. I'd grown up an hour east, heard the stories in passing. I never believed them until I saw the light for myself. It was early July, the kind of heat that makes bark peel and water feel like breath. I'd been stationed near one of the backcountry trailheads to log wildlife sightings and clear debris from lesser-used paths. Third night in, a storm rolled through hard rain. No thunder, just sheets of water and the smell of ozone so thick it clung to the tents. I woke just after 2 a.m., tent still shaking. And through the flap I saw it, a single yellow light bobbing gently down the trail, like someone carrying an old oil lantern. No footsteps, no beam, just glow. I radioed for check-in, no response. The rain stopped all at once, like a switch flipped. The lantern light paused, hovering at the trail bend, then began to move again closer. I stepped out barefoot, mud thick between my toes, thinking maybe it was another ranger. But the closer I got, the colder the air turned. The light passed behind a tree, and when it reappeared, it had split 2 lights now, then 3, all hovering, all in rhythm, like a breath inhaled and held. I blinked, and they vanished. Next morning, I found the prints, bare feet, small, spaced too wide for a normal gait. They circled my tent and led into the woods, then stopped clean. Not faded, not scattered, just stopped, mid-step. I photographed them, even measured the distance between. But when I went to upload the pictures, every image was corrupted, glitched, as if something blurred the shape after I took it. That night, I kept my camera close and slept with the flap open, flashlight ready. At 3:17 a.m., the light came again. I didn't get up this time, just watched from the edge of my sleeping bag, breath slow and shallow. The light was closer now, only 20 feet away, hovering just above the trail. It flickered, dimmed, then brightened again like someone shielding the flame with a small hand. I raised the camera, slowly, and took a single photo. No flash, no sound. The shutter clicked. The light flared once and went out. I checked the preview screen. The photo was black, but faint outlines began to form as I watched. Trees, trail, and a figure too small to be adult, standing just past the edge of the path, holding the lantern against their chest. The face was missing, blurred, completely smooth. I left the site the next morning, told my supervisor I needed to check a boundary marker downriver, just to get away. But the feeling followed me, like something had opened a door that wouldn't shut. My phone refused to hold signal near the trail. Maps froze, and my photos, even old ones, began to degrade colors bleeding, light smearing sideways. I started hearing whispers on playback, words I didn't remember recording. Where did you go? Why did you stop? I stopped playing them after that. 2 days later, a couple hiking an unlisted trail near the cliffs reported seeing a small ranger boy ahead of them, waving a lantern. They thought it was odd no child should be out that deep alone, but they kept walking. The boy always stayed 20 feet ahead, never speaking, just waving, until they rounded a switchback and found the trail gone. Not overgrown gone, sheer drop below. The lantern floated out into the gorge air, hovered, and blinked out. They hiked back in silence, the woman too shaken to speak. That night, I returned to my site. Something in me couldn't let it go. I set up a motion camera near the original trail bend and left a single item in the center of the path, an old park badge from a ranger who disappeared in 1984. I found it in a drawer the week before, unclaimed, unlabeled, at 3:21 a.m. The light came again. The camera triggered. I stayed in the tent, eyes shut tight. In the morning, the badge was gone. The camera was still recording 7 straight hours of footage. No interruption. But when I played it back, every tree bent inward, as if leaning to listen. The lantern never touched the frame. But near the 6-hour mark, something passed in front of the lens, a silhouette. Short, thin, gliding. The file ended there, corrupted from that frame forward. I left the park a week early. No resignation, no exit paperwork. I drove east until I stopped seeing trailheads. The camera never worked again. and sometimes on still nights. I catch flickers in my peripheral vision, yellow light moving through the dark. Once, I turned to face it and saw my own face reflected in a tent window, only younger and smiling. From the first step, the trail felt too quiet. Not peaceful, watchful. My name's Jared Dean. 39, a forest surveyor contracted to reassess erosion risk through sections of Joyce Kilmer that hadn't been walked in decades. My job was simple chart route systems. Note fall in timber. Confirm water flow markers still held. I'd been doing it for 15 years, and I've never once turned back early. But this stretch of laurel felt wrong. Dense, close, like it was growing inward instead of out. And when the wind blew, it only moved the branches behind me, never ahead. The underbrush whispered. I told myself it was just leaf friction. But every time I paused, the sound paused too. When I moved, it started again, like something pacing beneath the canopy. I marked a section of trail with orange tape and doubled back to check a reading. But the tape was gone. Not fallen, gone. I found it 30 yards off trail, tied in a neat bow around a rotting root. That was the first moment I felt it, the sense that the laurel wasn't hiding something. It was something. Midway through the loop, I found a narrow tunnel of branches, low enough I had to duck. My map showed no such formation. The air inside it was cooler, close, the smell of damp earth heavy in my throat. I walked 30 feet and emerged into a clearing I hadn't seen, marked anywhere perfectly round, with no obvious entrance but the tunnel I came through. In the center, there was a depression in the soil, freshly disturbed, and beside it, a single work glove, my brand, my size. But I still had both of mine tucked in my belt. I didn't touch it. I turned and left fast, trying to mark my path out, but every notch I carved into bark had vanished when I passed by again. By sundown, I was still in the same section of trail, though my tracker claimed I'd hiked over 6 miles. The laurel was thicker now, tangled. I cut through a narrow weave of branches and heard it for the first time, my voice, whispered low and flat, from just beneath the soil. Keep walking, Jared. The dirt shifted slightly, like something deep below had stirred. I didn't sleep, just crouched beneath a bent trunk, fireless, afraid to draw light. The whisper hadn't returned, but the ground hadn't stopped breathing. Every few minutes, I'd feel it, just a soft shift in the soil, like something rolling over in its sleep. I tried to radio out, but all I got was a burst of static that sounded too close to a voice. I turned the device off and packed before first light, determined to move, to get out. But no matter how I angled my compass, every path brought me back to the clearing with the depression and the glove. The tunnel was gone. Or maybe I was on the wrong side of it now. I tried digging. I don't know why. Maybe to prove there was nothing there. Maybe to prove there was. The soil gave way too easily, crumbling like it had already been turned, about a foot down. I hit something that gave soft, not quite flesh, not quite earth. Then the whisper returned, but not from the ground this time. From behind me, my voice again, but older, quieter. It needs your shape. I turned and saw a figure standing just beyond the laurel's edge. Same pack, same clothes, same me, but wrong. The eyes weren't mine. They blinked too slow. I ran. I don't know how long. Hours, maybe. I dropped my gear, tore through briars, ignored the pain. I followed the sun, or tried to. At one point I emerged into a dry wash, and for the first time in 2 days, I saw something familiar, a broken old ranger post I remembered from the hike in. Relief flooded me, but when I stepped toward it, my boot crunched something soft. I looked down. It was the same glove, same brand, same dirt-stained cuff, still warm. The whisper came again. Inside my head now, you left the rest beneath. I collapsed near the structure and must have passed out. When I woke, a rescue crew was standing over me. They said I was 2 miles east of the nearest trail. Barefoot, no pack, no tools. I don't remember taking my boots off. I don't remember anything between seeing that figure and collapsing. They said I kept muttering, "Not mine, not mine." I don't remember saying that either. But they did pull one thing from my pocket, something I'd never seen before. A folded scrap of bark, hollowed and carved with a symbol like a spiral inside a square. When I held it, the whisper stopped. I never went back. The job remains unfinished. The maps don't show that clearing. The Forest Service says it was likely a sinkhole or deer bedding site. But I know what I felt. And sometimes, when I walk near other stands of laurel, I hear it just below the roots, where the soil forgets its shape, breathing, waiting.